G'day, welcome back to Ethan's Wildlife once again. See, I told you guys I'd be back earlier. Today we're just going to be going around showing off a couple of different of our frogs. Now this is a frog. This is a northern banjo frog, also known as a northern pobblebonk or scarlet-sided pobblebonk. They're called that because of the red stripe that goes along the side there. And they're fairly common, but they spend a lot of time underground. They only really come out on moist nights, so they can be easy to miss. And geez, I tell you, a lot of people think that these are toads because they're quite a large brown frog and they can have bumpy skin. But they're not toads, they're in fact a native frog. And you can tell that because, ooh, it's alright, I'm not going to touch you. Just want to point out some key features, buddy. You're alright. You're having a bit of a fright there. You can tell that because, you see on the top there, there's no bony ridge that runs along the snout to the eyes. That's a feature of the cane toads. They also tend to not have any enlarged glands on the side of the neck here, which the toad has. They're a terrestrial frog, and they're really cool, in my opinion. They make a very distinctive noise, which gives them the pobblebonk name. Sort of like a bonk, bonk noise. And that's their call. Well, you better leave this guy to it. I was hoping to find one of these guys out tonight. Really spectacular looking frog. Can't wait to show you guys some more. So yeah, most of the animals we're going to be talking about tonight are amphibians. And amphibians were the first vertebrates to appear on land. And there's three remaining groups of amphibians. The frogs and toads, newts and salamanders, and a really bizarre group called the caecilians. They kind of look a little bit like a worm, but they're actually amphibians. But here in Australia we only have frogs and toads. Now, we only have one true toad, the introduced cane toad, which has become quite a pest, and a large variety of native frogs, some of which look a little bit like toads, but in fact aren't. And we're going to find as many species as we can tonight. Show you a few different types. So let's see what we can find. Ah yes, here we are. The frog species that pretty much everyone in Australia should be most familiar with. The green tree frog. Probably the most iconic frog in Australia, and you could even argue the world really. They're very popular in the pet trade. Even in places like the United States you get these guys as pets. And you can see why. I'm not going to touch you, it's alright. They're a decently sized frog. This is a medium sized individual. I've seen some massive ones. Just put my finger there so you can get some scale. Bright green skin in most species, although some can be a purplish brown. And you can see these toe pads here on the foot here. Now these are cling pads. These are traits of the tree frogs. Now we get a wide range of tree frogs here in Australia. This is one of the largest species. Now the last frog that we looked at, the pobblebonk, he's from the ground frog family. He doesn't have these cling pads. Meanwhile this guy, the green tree frog, he's a tree frog. And he's got these cling pads. Remarkable species. These cling pads allow the frogs to climb vertical surfaces very effectively, and yeah, they're just remarkable. You can see how the frog sort of has a shiny skin. That's because they have to keep their skin moist. Like all amphibians, frogs have what's called a semi-permeable skin, so this skin absorbs air and moisture from the environment. They can actually breathe through it a little bit. They do have lungs. Some species of salamander actually breathe entirely through their skin. They don't have any lungs really at all. But these guys, they still have lungs, but they can breathe through their skin, and that's why it's actually not best to handle frogs whenever you can avoid it. You shouldn't, because they can actually absorb any soaps or stuff in your hand, and your hand can actually drain moisture out of their skin, which can harm them. So it's best if you see a frog to just leave it alone. And you can see the key feature of all frogs here. Very powerful hind legs, and they use this to, of course, hop. Most frogs can hop very effectively, especially to avoid danger. Well, I'll leave this little guy be. Isn't he cute? Alright, we're just heading down towards a creek. Oftentimes there's lots of frogs around. It's a bit dry at the moment, so there's not as many calling, but I can hear a few different species. So hopefully we can find some of them and show some of you. I was hoping to find one of these guys tonight because of the rain. This is an ornate burrowing frog, one of the many colour morphs that they come in. As you can see, he's flattened himself out, trying to hide from me. And true to their name, these guys are burrowing frogs. So they only pop out after rain, otherwise they mostly live underground. You can see the amazing camouflage that these guys have. They're incredible. Quite a small species. I'll see, put my finger next to him for a size reference. I won't touch him though, simply because you shouldn't touch amphibians. And they're a type of ground frog, so very similar to the striped marsh frog. They're a type of ground frog, quite common, though not often encountered unless it's been rainy. Sure, we'll find more of them. I'll see if I can show you some of the different colours that they come in. Beautiful frog. Here's another ornate burrowing frog. This one's a lot less happy with me. Slightly different colour. You see, it's quite rotund, just like other ground frogs. They make a little foam nest in the water where they lay their eggs, and fertilisation is external like all other frogs. Alright, I'll leave this guy be. I don't want to stress him out way too much. I just wanted to show you the beautiful little camo pattern he's got. Oh, here we have another tree frog. This is a desert tree frog, or as I prefer to call them, red tree frog, but both are pretty silly names because, as you can see, this frog is neither red nor is it living in the desert. But they can live in the desert. They're one of our more widespread species. They're a lot smaller than the green tree frog, but they have the distinctive toe pads of most tree frogs. Can be found readily both on the ground and climbing up trees and stuff. They're very common and widespread, but they're often missed because of their smaller size. And I think they're just spectacular. This little guy's just been scared into an awkward position. As you can see, he's quite camera shy. He doesn't really want me to get a good shot of him. Oh well. We don't want to stress him out too much, so we better leave him alone and look for more frogs, eh? Sources of water like this creek are really good for frogs because, as amphibians, they need to keep their skin moist, first of all, and second of all, their eggs don't have shells like reptiles and birds, so they need to return to water in most cases to reproduce. Otherwise the eggs will dry out and the young will die. So water is the amphibian's best friend, and you can hear some of the frogs calling. Let's see if we can find any more of them. And I've managed to find one of the callers. This is a broad-palmed rocket frog. You can see why they're called rocket frogs. Very pointy, very aerodynamic in shape. They're actually a tree frog, but they don't have the big, well-developed pads of many tree frogs, but they still have a little notch on the tips of their toes which can distinguish them from ground frogs. But they do spend a lot of time on the ground. A couple of different types of rocket frog here in Australia. This one's the broad palm species. It's not quite as well patterned as the striped rocket frog, which is also very common around here. And true to their name, these guys will launch themselves really high into the air to avoid a predator. Yeah, he's calling. So this will be a male. Male frogs do most of the calling. And they do this to try and attract a mate. Especially after rain, you'll hear lots of the frogs going off. It can be surprisingly hard to find them based off the call as well. I managed to find this one. Quite well hidden. Well, good luck, buddy. Ah, yes. So this little guy is what I was hoping to find next. It's another type of ground frog. It's a striped marsh frog. Also, I just want to say, if you hear any cats meowing in the background, I don't actually own any cats. It's not a real cat. I'm just going to move into position here. It's not a real cat. It's an audio device that was used in a prank, meant to sound like a cat. But this is a striped marsh frog, a very common species that you can find in most backyards really. Like I said earlier, it's another species of ground frog, very closely related to the popplebonk we saw earlier. You can see why they call him a striped marsh frog. Look at that stripe pattern there. These guys make a very distinctive call as well. You can often hear them going off, but a lot of people tend not to see them all that much. They do show up from time to time. Very remarkable little frogs, aren't they? Well, we'll leave him be, eh? You can see what I mean by how abundant they are. Here's another one. And then over here, there's another one. All three are striped marsh frogs. They do have some diversity in the coloration, but they've all got this pretty standard brown striped colour. And they also typically have a lighter stripe running down the centre of the back. They're actually one of my favourite species to go out and find. Very, very cute. Also, that noise you hear in the background, that one, that's a boobook owl. The smallest owl in Australia. Also one of the more common ones. We'll see if we can find him. Probably not though, he's probably way up in a tree. Let's have a look. Well, unfortunately our boobook is a little bit too far off for us to find, but they're also pretty significant predators. They'll eat things like smaller mammals, and they make a very distinctive call. It's supposedly supposed to sound like boobook, but I don't really see it. It's a very cool noise. Gotta love owls. Well, unfortunately we couldn't talk about Australian amphibians without bringing up this guy. Everyone should know what this is. This is a cane toad. The only true toad in Australia. And this guy is an introduced species. So we'll talk about how to identify these guys first. These guys are often confused with a lot of our native frogs, especially the brown ground frogs. And you can tell the difference by several means. First of all, there's a bony ridge that runs across the eyes. Ooh, hello buddy. He caught a bug. Well, it runs across the eyes, down the snout here. Yeah, he's scared of me. These guys have got no teeth or claws, so there's actually nothing to worry about. But that sac there, which is very distinct in most cane toads, is what causes all the problems. So that is a poison gland. When the toad is threatened, it will secrete a milky fluid from that gland. That poison is very, very deadly to pretty much all of our native species that eat it. There is one snake, the keelback, which is resistant to the poison. They can actually eat small cane toads, and a couple of our more intelligent predators like crows and water rats have also figured out how to eat toads without getting poisoned. But most other things like goannas, snakes, quolls, pretty much any of our native predators will eat these guys and they'll die. Now, how did this guy get here? Well, in the 1930s, cane farmers in far north Queensland were having trouble with a beetle that was eating all of their sugar cane. So in order to combat this, these guys were introduced from Hawaii, where they were actually introduced to as well from Central America, where these guys are native. And they were introduced to try and control this beetle, and it didn't actually work. They just spread like wildfire, and they eat pretty much anything they can fit inside their mouth. They're not picky at all. So they've spread all across northern Australia, down to about the central coast of New South Wales, and they're continuing to spread, and they've gotten a lot larger here in Australia than pretty much anywhere. And they're the largest toad species, so yeah, they're pretty big. But yeah, hopefully with those features you can identify these guys from a native frog, because unfortunately a lot of people confuse this guy with our native ground frogs and they get killed. People not knowing that what they've got is not a cane toad. So yeah, well, this is a cane toad, and yeah, a single female will produce about 40,000 eggs twice a year. So they're very prolific breeders, and they're poisonous at all life stages. So really the best way to control them is to be able to identify the eggs and remove those. But unfortunately these guys are here to stay. They're just far too common. The best thing we can do is try and stop them from spreading any further. Yeah. It's a very interesting and tragic story, the cane toad in Australia. And here's another remarkable little guy. This is an eastern dwarf or sedge tree frog. Now, they're often called sedge frogs because they can be found sitting like this in sedge grasses around ponds, and they have a very distinctive creaking sort of call. And look, he's sitting like a little polite gentleman with his arms neatly folded up underneath him. These guys are extremely small. This is a full-grown individual. Let's see if I can put my finger next to him for a scale. There. See, he is absolutely tiny. And this is a full-grown frog. They're quite abundant. You can often hear them around gardens and ponds and stuff like that. Another tree frog, like the green tree frog and red tree frog we've already seen today, they too have very distinctive cling pads which they use to climb very effectively, and they most often come out at night like all frogs, and during the day, or when it's not good conditions, they'll often hide up in curled up leaves or deep within grasses, and you can often still hear them calling during the day. This is probably one of the species most people hear a lot of, but they don't often actually see. So it's always cool to get out and see them. They sort of look a little bit like a tiny green tree frog, but they have some very distinctive stripes. You see the white stripe underneath the eye there, and the brown stripe that runs down from the eye to their ear, which is called a tympanum. Sort of like that little disc on the side of their head, it's like their ear. It's called a tympanum. So he's just so cute, isn't he? Well, we'll let this little guy continue doing what he's doing, and I think we might wrap up after this. So thanks so much for joining me again. It's sort of a good variety of frogs, and unfortunately we didn't see the owl, but we did hear it. So hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.